beautiful thing about this program that we call P2N is that P2N provides, in a sense, a waka or programs by which you are assisted to be able to be facilitated in missions, in the calling for missions. And what do we have there are short-term. They're short-term teams. They're teams that go out for a short time. I mean, you're looking at 2 weeks, 3 weeks, up to a month, or maybe a little bit more, that you go to a particular area, and there's an organization there for involvement from you. And in there you experience a different culture, different people. You have an opportunity to witness to people that are different from you. Maybe as we're living in New Zealand, we have never witnessed to people that have never heard the name of Jesus, or maybe never go to church, or people that are outside the traditional Christian institution. And you may have an opportunity to do this through some of our short-term teams that are organized. So talk to somebody in your church, in a program. Mention the name P2N because that's something that there are many more and more churches that are hearing about, and they're wanting engagement. But all that is trying to provide for you, the man and the woman of God, the young person that you are, that have feeling a call on your life. But I go back again to what I had mentioned in the earlier sessions. It's a call to leave, even for short term, so that you know what's involved. But it's a call really for you to develop and adopt a lifestyle, a behavior pattern by which there is a demonstration of a commitment to missions for the nations of the world. And even you are in a local church in Auckland or in Wellington or in New Zealand, there is still the prayer, the involvement, the giving, and the short-term participation that you can make in the missions. There are some people that are called to just completely cut ties and go out and live in an area in China or in India or Africa on a long-term basis. But that shouldn't stop us from taking several trips, 1 or 2 trips a year, be involved with others in the short mission term. I want to share with you something that I have discovered recently in involvement in missions. About 50 years ago was my first short-term outreach team that I got involved in. And I was in New Zealand as a student from Tongan, a Tongan scholarship student. And in our system in Tonga, there are many people that sit exams and they evaluated you, and if you pass at the very top, they have a consideration for you to get a scholarship. And a scholarship is when the government pays for you to go and study. They pay for everything. Basically, they pay you to study. And I was fortunate. I was one of those scholarship students, won a scholarship to come here to New Zealand. My first year was, and last year at high school was to be Auckland Grammar. And that was like a preparation to go to university. Never in the history of our country, this particular scheme for education, have anybody ever gave that up or resigned from that. I was the first one. And here in Auckland, New Zealand, I had an encounter with God that absolutely transformed my life. I grew up in a Christian family, traditional Christian family. I was a Methodist. And I was already a Christian. A couple of years before I left for New Zealand, I had committed my life to Christ. But it was in New Zealand that I had an encounter where the Holy Spirit came onto my life in a powerful, powerful way that transformed me, transformed the way I look at things, transformed my life, and then realized that there was a call for me. And it was a call to preach the gospel to the nations. And at that time, I didn't understand what the nations were, because the first foreign country I ever visited was New Zealand, from Tonga. And so I had this call, and I went to the manager. We were living in a place, a hostel place for Tongan scholarship students. Went to the manager, and I said, I feel God has called me to leave. And he just said, he thought initially I was joking. And he said, what do you mean leave? I said, I want to give up my scholarship because God has called me to preach the gospel. And I want to go and prepare and do whatever I need to do that. And he looked at me like he has just heard from a mentally unstable person. And as it was our system, he had to fill out a form, and I had to write a letter and apply to our government to tell them that I had quit this scholarship, and that I needed to go on to preach the gospel. So it went to our government. The cabinet was discussing this issue. And the reason I'm telling you, because there's a lot of implication here that may be able to relate to your life. And so my letter and the form of application to quit came into the cabinet. And it was not until a few years later that the cabinet, a member of the cabinet at the time, told me that when the letter and the application came, there were two things they were discussing in the cabinet. One of the ministers said, well, if God really called that young man, we don't want to stand in his way. Maybe we just approve it and give it to him. And then somebody else said, well, if God did not call him, he's got to be mental, so we don't want him either. Let's just approve him and let him go. So I got a letter of approval, and I walked out of it was a royal hostel where the scholarship students were kept in Epsom, Auckland. And I walked out of there with my little possessions in a little suitcase and trying to find somewhere to live. And I was heading out to preach the gospel. To be honest with you, I didn't know where I was going. I didn't really, all I knew was that I was to preach the gospel. But I knew definitely that I was to leave what I had been doing. My father was an educator. He was a broadcaster, so I telegrammed him in London. He was at the time working at the BBC temporarily. I telegrammed him and said, Dad, I quit my scholarship. God has called me to preach the gospel. He telegrammed back and said, you are a disgrace to our family, disgrace to the nation. If you leave, you're no longer my son. Maybe some of you don't think seriously about this issue. For us in Tonga, at the time I was growing up in Tonga, this was a huge thing to give up a scholarship. And the reaction from my father was expected. I expected it. He was going to be angry. Particularly, he's a man. He's an educated man. He's a man who has been involved in education in Tonga. And for his son to do that was just unthinkable. Anyway, cut a long story short, I left, and my life got transformed by an introduction to two men. At the time, I became familiar with a little coffee house that was run at Little Queen Street in the CBD in Auckland. And it was a coffee house called a Teen Challenge Coffee House. And you go in there, at the ground floor was a striptease place, and you had to go downstairs where the little coffee house was being run. And a man by the name of Neville Winger was the director at the time, and I went in this one afternoon, and he said to me, Kalafi, there are two Americans that want to see you. So I said, okay, I'll come around tomorrow afternoon again and see them. So he arranged for these two Americans and for me to meet the next afternoon. Came back to the Teen Challenge Coffee House, and there were two Americans that were there. His name, one of them, his name is Lauren Cunningham. And he had a brother in Lower called Jimmy Rogers. And Lauren Cunningham is the founder of Youth with a Mission. And they were there in Auckland. They came to Auckland. That's their first trip to the South Pacific to introduce youth with a mission. And they were directed by God to come to Auckland, directed by God to make contact with this Teen Challenge coffee house. So we sat there, and I told them my testimony of what had happened to me. And they said, Kalafi, we want to take a short-term team of evangelism team to Tonga. And the next year was the year of the coronation of our king, Taufa Ahau Tubo IV. And he said, we want to bring a team from America, from New Zealand, just a team of young people that will go to Tonga. And I sat there and listened to them. At that time, Youth with a Mission was just an idea. It was a program of short-term outreach. It was nothing compared to what it is now. So right then I felt God saying that I need to be involved. I said to these two gentlemen, I'll go back to Tonga. I had just given up my scholarship. I'll go back to Tonga and organize the outreach if you can bring a team to Tonga. So it was set. And I went back to Tonga at the beginning of this was in December, went back to Tonga at the beginning of the new year. In the meantime, we had organized out of the coffee house and outreach where we learned how to witness. We went out to Ponsonby, where in Ponsonby there were a lot of islanders in that time. I mean, we're talking about 1967 now, and probably the majority of you were not even born then. And flew back to Tonga. But what I want to say was that was the turning point in my life. And the last 50 years has just been an incredible ride. That's how I became engaged and got involved in missions. But friends, the key principle in the word I want to leave with you is this. And I've seen this in the lives of many, many others in missions. There is a price to pay. It's not a free ride. And it's different in every one of us. The price I had to pay was giving up my scholarship. Interesting thing with God is that the price you pay in giving up something, God gives it back to you many, many times over. He's given me so many opportunities to study and be able to achieve things that I could not have achieved by pursuing this pathway of a scholarship. I had to give up the very things that was so important to me in my relationship with my family. I have to face the music in terms that I would be leaving Tonga, and I didn't know where to go. And I was still a young man. I was 17 going on 18 at the time, and here I was making huge decisions for my life. And didn't know the impact and the implication of those decisions. It was just trying to follow the Lord. All of us, we have to pay a price. There is something that we give up. And it's like Jesus says, if you want to follow me, deny yourself. That's a price. You pay that price. And then you carry your cross and follow him. And the cross is a death weapon in a sense. There is always that self-sacrifice principle that we take with us as we follow him to the nations of the world. The reason why I'm talking like this is because there are people who have had great calls to God in missions. There are people who are very gifted in so many areas, but they haven't been willing to pay a price. There are certain things that they haven't been willing to give up. Peter and John had to give up something. Peter and Andrew and John and James, they had to give up something. You see, effective men in missions in the Bible, everybody, they had to give up something. What are you willing to give up? What is it that God has put his finger on and say, well, you give that up? There is always a sense where we deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him. And when we pay that price, God, in a sense, we're no longer the ones owing God. This God owes us as He takes us to Himself, understanding what we had to go through, understanding the price we had to pay, things we had to give up. And our call then becomes extremely valuable. There are times of discouragement that you go through. The longer you serve in missions, there are times where you go through battles. But every time you look back at your history and review what you've gone through and see what you have given up. You've given up something for something that's far more valuable. It's not giving up that which is wrong that's more difficult. It's giving up that which is right, which you feel you have a right to, which you feel it's okay, which you feel it's something that you have been engaged in. It's a profession. It's something. It's giving up those things that's harder. We don't give up things that are wrong. We're delivered. We should be delivered from it. But it's the things that are okay when we give up those things for the sake of the Lord and His calling upon us. That's what's difficult. How many of you, maybe that you are not released and facilitated to the way that you need to be because there's something in there you have held on to, you haven't given up. We need to come to the Lord with our hands open. That means we're not holding to anything. We are opening our hands to receive from Him, opening our hands so that He can put His hand in our hands and lead us. And one of the most wonderful things when you are leading a team or going out with a short-term team, or a team of young people, is you know that there's some of them that have given up something. They've given up their holiday, that they could be doing something. They've given up a job temporarily. They have given up a holiday that could be with their families. There's something. Somebody that I met in America that sold his favorite horse. He only had a horse. Somebody from the state of Arkansas, where horses are very important, and he sold his horse to be able to get the money to go out on a short-term team. Some kids, they sold their cars to be able to get the money to go out. There's a sacrifice. There's something that we give up. And you know, friends, Jesus gave up heaven and the comforts of heaven and being with the Father all the time, giving it up to die on a cross, a sacrifice. And missions, it's a sacrifice that you and I have to make. We will reach the world if every Christian are willing to pay a price, to give up something so that we can reach the masses. We have the rest of eternity to enjoy ourselves. We only got a limited time where we need to give up something, pay a price to engage with God in taking the gospel to the nations. God bless you.